that's exactly what you mean. Alright, we are live. Cool beans. Alright, so hopefully Eli and Bella and Emily watch this and are all caught up. So for those of you watching at home in the meantime, this will be our last class of this calendar year, so we'll be off next week because that's Christmas Day, and we'll be off the week after that because that's New Year's Day, and then the week after that should be the 8th, if I'm doing the math correctly, will be the next time we meet. So last class for the year, then 2-week break, and then we'll start again on the 8th. If schedules are changing because of the semester switchover and we need to pick a different night or whatever, just get in contact with me and we'll hash that out. But otherwise, we'll assume we're staying Mondays at 6:30. Alright, so we are on lesson 11 tonight. Last time, again, we were talking about the Exodus. So again, they leave Egypt, go out into the wilderness, they go out to the desert, they go to the Mount Sinai, where Moses first talked to God, and he told Moses that they would come back and they'd worship God there again, and they do. So they come back to Mount Sinai, God gives Moses the law, and then they depart from there. They have the whole golden calf episode. They depart from there. About a year later, they get to the border of the promised land. The 12 spies go in, and they come back. Two of the spies say, all right, promised land is awesome, let's go, God is with us. 10 of the spies say, if we go in there, we're going to die, we should go back to Egypt. The people listen to the 10 bad spies rather than the 2 good ones, and so as a punishment, God curses that generation to spend 40 years in the wilderness so that they'll die off and then their children can inherit the promised land. So that's why they spend 40 years in the wilderness, is because they're cursed by God as punishment for doubting God and listening to the 10 bad spies instead of the 2 good ones. So that gets us through the Pentateuch. So then the book of Deuteronomy is at the end of those 40 years, when they're about to enter the promised land. Moses gives the law to the people again. That's what Deuteronomy means, second law. So to that new generation that's about to go into the promised land, Moses reminds them of how they are to live as God's people. He repeats the law to them, and then Moses dies and passes leadership to Joshua, son of Nun, who was one of those 2 good spies who had initially gone into the promised land. So of that whole generation that died out, Joshua and Caleb, the 2 good spies, are the only ones who are still alive to actually enter the promised land.
Is that because they did not say that the promised land they said the promised land was good?
Right, it's because they put their trust in God. They were like, all right, God's with us, let's go in the promised land, woohoo! But then the 10 spies led everyone else astray. So Joshua kind of becomes second, through the rest of their wandering, Joshua becomes the second in command to Moses. And then when Moses dies, he takes over. So now we are getting to the book of Joshua, named for Joshua. He maybe is the one who wrote it, or is just somebody writing about the exploits under Joshua's leadership. But yeah, that's how the book gets the name. And so this covers the actual entry into the promised land and the campaigns to conquer the land and how it gets divided up amongst the people. So that's what we are talking about tonight, now that we are out of the Pentateuch and into the other historical books of the Old Testament. So, opening exercise on page 45, looking for a leader. So what makes a good leader? Make a quick list of qualities you think a good leader should have, and then you don't have partners here to exchange the book list to compare lists, so just take a minute to write qualities you think make a good leader. Okay.
people that you're in and helps out people. Like say like someone like sprained their foot or something. You could like put them on a horse or something and help them out or something like that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or give them crutches or something.
Yeah.
Something like
But
that.
yeah, you make sure people are taken care of and people
Yeah.
have what they need.
Yeah, something like that.
Hopefully make wise decisions,
Yeah. And then right there.
understand how reality works, and don't
Don't
try to force everyone into a
things.
fantasy land. Yeah. Alright. So God chose Joshua to be the next leader of Israel after Moses died. Joshua would lead the Israelites into the promised land and in the conquest of the land, but the real leader of the Israelites was God. He would go before his people and give them victory, which is kind of a rather important point throughout all of the scriptures that people keep losing sight of. But big picture overview. The book of Joshua begins with Joshua taking over leadership from Moses, who has died. The book covers an intensive 7-year conquest of Canaan, and during those years Joshua leads the people of Israel in 3 campaigns against the people of Canaan to occupy the land. However, Israel did not completely remove the Canaanite people from the land. In some places, Israelites settled among the Canaanites, which was against God's will and command and would cause many problems down the road for the people of Israel. The purpose of the book of Joshua is to record how God fulfilled his promise to give the land of Canaan to the Israelites as an inheritance. This book also describes how the land was divided among Israel's tribes and Israel's recommitment to the covenant that God had given them at Sinai. The accounts in this lesson are found in the book of Joshua. The author is traditionally understood to be Joshua, but it may have been written by an unknown author. The events happened between roughly 1400 and 1375 BC. Alright, 46. Joshua entering into the promised land with Rahab and the spies.
That's a little fast.
Hmm?
That's a lot fast.
That is the Ark of the Covenant.
I'm assuming we'll learn about that.
Hmm?
I'm assuming we'll learn about that.
Yes. So, starting at the top with Rahab and the spies. So God made Joshua the leader of Israel after Moses died. Joshua knew that to enter the promised land they would have to first conquer the city of Jericho. So he sent 2 spies into Jericho. They snuck in and went to the house of a woman named Rahab. Unfortunately, someone found out there were Israelite spies in Jericho, and so soldiers came to Rahab's house and questioned her. But Rahab believed in the Lord, the God of Israel. She hid the spies and told the soldiers they were gone. Rahab knew God was going to give Jericho to the Israelites. She told the spies that all of Jericho was in fear of the Israelites and their God, and she asked the spies to protect her and her family when they came back to take the city. What did the spies do? Read Joshua 6, 22 through 25, and how does this account show God's mercy and love for all people? They're giving this to us out of order, but that's weird. Okay. Why do they lay it out like that?
It's all from bottom to top.
Yeah. So let's jump down to the bottom left corner, because that's chronologically in order. I did not write these books. If I did, I would make them make them make sense. So yeah. So we'll start with Israel enters the promised land, and then we'll go back up to Rahab and the spies. Sorry, I reviewed this last week, and then shut up. Okay. So it was finally time. The Israelites stood at the bank of the Jordan River, ready to cross over to the land that God had promised to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for Israel. But there was a problem. The Jordan was overflowing its banks, and anyone who stepped in it would be caught up in the foaming, swirling waters and carried away. 40 years before, the fathers of the Israelites had not trusted that God would give them the land. Would they trust him now? Looking to Joshua 3, 7 through 17. The Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priests who bear the Ark of the Covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." And Joshua said to the people of Israel, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." And Joshua said, "Here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and to the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe, and when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand on one heap. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of the harvest, the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down toward the Sea of Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. So just as God parted the Red Sea to get them out of Egypt, he now parts the Jordan to get them into the Promised Land. So would the people trust God? So far they are, because again, you have this big swirling river they're afraid to cross, and Joshua's like, hey, God says if you, priests walk into the water, and then they'll stop and it'll part and we can go. And the priests trusted them enough to walk into the water, and then as soon as their feet got wet, God parted the sea, or parted the river, and they were able to cross. As they were crossing, Joshua commanded one man from each tribe to take a rock from the middle of the river, and then they carried them to the shore, and Joshua set them up as an altar. Why do you think he did that?
Maybe to thank God for something.
Part of it.
Thank him for helping them cross the Red Sea or bringing them into the Promised Land.
You're in the ballpark.
To worship him? Maybe
Yeah, that in a sense.
To worship him, because maybe they don't have their church built yet?
Well, they don't, but yeah. Yeah, so he sets the stones up as an altar, essentially.
Maybe to be communion?
Well, communion hasn't been instituted yet.
Yeah.
So. All right, let's read 4:1-7. When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, each tribe a man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priests' feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, when your children ask in time to come, what do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, so these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. So why does he have them gather the stones?
He has them gather the stones so they can make a memorial for God.
Yes.
And thank him for it.
And what's the purpose of a memorial?
To worship him and thank him, or to remember
Right.
it forever.
Right, that's right in the name, memorial, remembering. So he has them gather stones from the floor of the Jordan, and he builds a monument out of them, so that for the rest of history, whenever parents take their kids to see the Jordan, they'll be like, hey, what's that stack of rocks over there about? And the parents can be like, oh, well, when we crossed the Jordan, we picked God parted the waters so we could walk across the bottom, and we picked those stones up from the bottom, and now there's a monument here, so we always remember this miracle God did to bring us into the Promised Land. So it's there to remind Israel for all of time what God did for them when he brings them into the Promised Land. Which brings us to the follow-up question, what does the church do to remember what God has done for us?
We take communion.
It's part of it.
Because he died for our sins.
Where do we take communion?
Altar.
Oh. Yes, but broadly speaking, At church, yeah. So we gather weekly to read God's Word, to sing His praises, to give prayers of thanksgiving, to hear a sermon reminding us of what God has done for us. And so we have a rhythm in our lives to make sure that we're always being told what God has done for us. We're always reminded so that we remember all that God has done for us, so that we hopefully don't forget. So yeah, so they didn't really give us the introduction here. So the Ark of the Covenant, that's the little yellow box thing in the picture there. Moses, when they built the tabernacle back in Exodus, they also built the Ark of the Covenant, which is a decorated chest essentially, which represents the presence of God. So again, God is everywhere, He's omnipresent, but He's with Israel in a special way. So He has them build the tabernacle as His house. That's what tabernacle means. It's a tent of dwelling. And so God is everywhere, but He's with Israel in the tabernacle in a special way. And the kind of the symbol of His presence then is the Ark of the Covenant. And so it's called that because it's to remind Israel of that covenant they made, that contract agreement that they will be His people and He will be their God and they'll live according to His laws. And so within the Ark of the Covenant, they place Aaron's staff, I think Moses' staff too, the tablets that the Ten Commandments were written on, because that's the summary of the covenant they make, as well as some of the manna as a reminder of how God fed them while they were in the wilderness. But it serves as kind of this embodiment of God's presence among the people. So the priests would carry it as a sign to remind everyone that God was there, and whenever they set up the tabernacle, they would put the Ark of the Covenant in the center of the tabernacle. And when the high priest would do the sacrifices for the nation of Israel, he would bring some of the blood and he would splash it on the Ark of the Covenant, and that was the way to kind of give the sacrifice to God on behalf of the people. So yeah, the Ark is a presence of the God. So that's why he said when the priests are carrying it and they touch the waters of the Jordan, the waters part, because that's God, in a sense, entering the waters to halt it for Israel. That it's a way for them to see that God is with them. Does that make sense? Have you seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? Okay. Well, if you ever see Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's the Ark of the Covenant, is what they're calling it the whole time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's that like they say in the movie, like it's a direct line of communication to God, because it's God's presence, essentially.
What they do they just carry it wherever they go, or do they bury it somewhere, like put it up on a stone?
The Israelites would carry it with them wherever they go. You know, whenever they would set up the tabernacle, because remember the tabernacle is a big tent essentially, so it's whenever they would leave, they would disassemble it and carry it over, and then they'd reset it up whenever they next made camp. So whenever they have the tabernacle set up, they put the Ark of the Covenant in there, because again, like the Ark is God's house and the tabernacle is God's house, so it stays there. Then a couple hundred years later, when Solomon builds the temple, then the Ark of the Covenant will remain in the temple, but then it gets lost down the line. I think the Philistines take it, and then we don't really know what happened to it because Israel doesn't recover it. There's some people in Ethiopia that say that they have it, and they just don't show it to anybody.
Like present day?
Yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, we don't know where it went. When Jerusalem falls, it gets lost. So some people think it got buried and hidden under the temple, and it just hasn't been excavated yet. Some people think it got taken away. Hence why you have Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're scouring the world to try to find where it's hidden, because we don't know where it is.
In the movie, yeah. Did they ever find it in the movie?
In the movie, yes.
Yeah. Present day, where is God's temple located? Or where do they think it is located?
kind of a loaded question.
Yeah.
So the physical building temple, like what we talk about in the Old Testament, doesn't exist anymore. Rome destroyed it around 70 AD, and now where it was built is called the Temple Mount, which is currently controlled by Muslims, and they have a mosque there, which is what?
So kind of by Israel, somewhere.
Yeah, so it's in Jerusalem, but there's a mosque there, because that's what the Crusades were all about. Is because Islam says that Jerusalem is their holy city, as well as the Jews saying it's their holy city, and they each think they should have a temple there. And so the Crusades was basically Christians and Muslims fighting over who should have control of the holy city. So whether there should be a temple or a church or a mosque there, and yeah, the Muslims kind of won out in the end. So they have a mosque on the Temple Mount, and that's part of the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict right now. And so yeah, there's lots of people who are like, oh, we need to rebuild it. We need to build a temple there again so that Jesus can come back. Or there's just Jews who want to have a temple built there because there hasn't been a temple built there in 2,000 years. But yeah, the physical building temple the first one gets destroyed by the Babylonians, and then they build the second temple, and then that gets destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, and there has not been a third temple built. Theologically speaking, Jesus is the temple, so
He's everywhere.
yeah. So in that sense, the temple is everywhere because Jesus is everywhere. But yeah, the physical building, the building was destroyed in 70 AD and has not been rebuilt.
Well, that's weird.
Yeah, but the site where it would be if it hadn't been destroyed is in Jerusalem. All right. So they enter into Canaan, and the first major city when you cross the Jordan then is Jericho, which is our bottom right corner of the page here. So the people of Jericho were scared of the Israelites, whose God had made the water stop so that they could pass through, but they had tall, thick walls to protect their city. How would the Israelites break down the walls? They wouldn't. God would. His plan, the Israelite army would circle the city with the priests leading the way, carrying the ark and blowing trumpets. Then they would return to camp. This went on for 6 days, and then what happened on the 7th day? So, you'd think so, yeah. So Jericho is the first major city as you cross the Jordan. So if they're going to have a campaign to take over Canaan, like Jericho is the first one to take over. And so the people of Jericho have heard about Israel, like they've heard stories about the Exodus 40 years ago. They've heard about the things that happened while they were wandering in the wilderness, because God has done various signs and wonders for Israel the whole time they're in the wilderness. They are hearing reports about how God now parted the waters of the Jordan so Israel can come in. So they're like pretty freaked out, but they're also like, well, we're in a fortified city with a really big wall. I think we're going to be safe. We're kind of impenetrable like the Titanic.
Is it kind of like the wall in Israel today?
I honestly don't know what the wall looks like, but
Yeah. But just something like that.
sort of. I thought there was a picture in here. There's not. I was looking somewhere else when I saw the picture. But yeah, it's the way it worked back then is if you had a city, you just surrounded the city with a big wall, and then you'd have one gate where you could control people coming in and out of. Have you seen Have you seen the movie Troy with Brad Pitt? Okay.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get a picture. So yeah, so Israel gets to Jericho. There's this big wall there. And so now we're in chapter 6. Excuse me. Starting at verse 15. That's an artistic representation.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah,
It's a big wall.
yeah, just a massive wall around the city in order to protect it.
That's a decent sized wall.
So 6:15 through 21. Yeah, so God has Israel every day. They just gather around, they play their trumpets, they do a parade around the city, and then they just go back to camp, and the people in Jericho are like, what the heck, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
And then on the seventh day, they rose early at the dawn of day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent." That was the thing at the top of the page. So remember, before they take Jericho, they sent the spies in. Rahab hid them, because Rahab is like, hey, I heard about the stuff your God has done, and I'm pretty sure he's going to win, so I'd like to be on his side, please. So I'm going to hide you, and I'll help you escape, and then maybe don't kill me when you guys take the city. And Jerusalem was like, all right. Or, yeah, the spies were like, all right. So now that they're on the 7th day, he says, Rahab and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown, and as soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. So, 7th day, they march around it 7 times instead of just once. They play their trumpets, they shout, and then God just makes the walls go. The city is exposed, and then Israel just charges in, takes everyone by surprise, they conquer it, and they kind of slaughter everyone, except for Rahab, because, again, she had confessed faith in God. She was like, please don't kill me. And they said, yeah, you helped us out, you have faith in God, cool. So she lives, everyone else is destroyed, and what does this victory show the Israelites?
That God is with them.
Right, so...
That's basically the complete opposite of Judgment.
Yeah. But yeah, this is to show, again, it's not Israel who wins the victory, it's God who wins the victory. Because just walking around a wall and playing a trumpet is not going to make it fall down.
Yeah.
But God is like, okay, you do, like, this is how I'm going to work. You're going to march around, you're going to blow the trumpets. Common sense says that's not going to do anything, but because I'm God and I'm with you, I'm going to make the walls fall down. So it's God who makes the walls fall down, and he's doing all this to show Israel he's with them, he's keeping his promise to deliver the promised land to them. They just need to actually trust him, unlike what their parents did, which is why they were stuck in the wilderness for 40 years. So now we'll jump back up to the top of the page with Joshua 6:22 through 25. So as all of this is going on, but to the 2 men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, "Go into the prostitute's house," that's Rahab, "and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her." So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So how does this account show God's mercy and love for all people?
It shows that,
Right. So Rahab is not from the nation of Israel. She's a Canaanite. She was a native of Jericho. And so if it were just only Israel, only the genetic descendants of Abraham can be God's chosen promised people, then Rahab would be screwed. But even though she's not from Israel, she still put her faith and trust in God, and that saves her. He welcomes her into the fold, even though she's not from Israel, but because of her faith, she's brought into Israel. So she was preserved because she trusted in God and she saved the messengers. So now she's brought into Israel. She's basically an honorary Israelite. She's adopted into them. And she spends the rest of her days living with the Israelites. And she actually becomes an ancestor of Jesus because of all of this. So even though Israel is God's chosen people in the Old Testament, God's promise is not limited just to Israel. It's to anyone who puts their faith and trust in him. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. Page 47. Excuse me. So think about it. Joshua and Caleb were the only two of their generation who went into the promised land. Because again, those were the two good spies. So they get to survive the 40 years while everyone else dies out. Joshua was Moses' assistant in the wilderness, and he led the Israelites into the promised land and in battle against their enemies. Joshua's name means the Lord saves in Hebrew. In Greek, that name is Jesus. Joshua's life pointed to Jesus, our Savior. Jesus fought all our enemies on the cross. On the last day, Jesus will come back to take us to our promised land, our forever home with him. So yeah, if you're reading it in Hebrew, it's Yehoshua or Yeshua, which is what Jesus means. So technically, Joshua and Jesus are the same names. We just change them a little bit to make it a little bit clearer who we're talking about. But yeah, the name Joshua means the Lord saves, and so Jesus' name means the Lord saves, because that's what he does for us.
Where's the Great Sea? Is the Great Sea on the map?
The Great Sea? Yeah, so it would be the Mediterranean.
Oh, okay.
Oops. That's not supposed to happen.
Okay, so that means that map is...
So this is... Yeah, so this is Canaan. This is Jerusalem. So this area here is modern day Israel. So this is the Great Sea on your map, Mediterranean Sea now. So there's Egypt. Jericho's right there.
Oh, okay. And then Mount Carmel is that first one, right? That makes sense.
Bad geography. Alright. So then the land is divided among the tribes of Israel. So the first half of Joshua recounts the military campaigns that they do to conquer the land, and then the second half, after they've conquered the land, the second half is God instructing Israel how they're to divvy it up among themselves. So
right now they're in the promised land.
yeah. So the promised land is Canaan, because again, that's where Abraham was when God made that promise that he would give that land to Abraham and to his offspring. So remember, Abraham's in Canaan, Isaac and Jacob are in Canaan, and then Joseph brings them all down to Egypt, and then they do the exodus out of Egypt, and now they go back to Canaan. That's the land that was promised to them, because it was promised to Abraham and the other descendants of Abraham.
Oh.
So they come back.
So, that family that Jesus promised, are they still alive? Or like kids?
That's the Jews.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
So, yeah. So you have. So biblically speaking, you have the nation of Israel, which is divided into the 12 tribes. In a couple months, we're going to talk about so down the line, about, I can't math right now. I think about 700 years from where we are right now in the text, the biblical nation of Israel is going to split into two. You'll have the northern kingdom of Israel, where there are 10 tribes, and then the southern kingdom of Judah, which is comprised of basically Judah and Benjamin, the last other two tribes. The northern kingdom is going to get lost, and so then all that's left is the nation of Judah, and so that's when the Israelites start being called the Jews, because they're It's just Judah, Judean, Jew. That's where you get that. So then by the time of the New Testament, they're just all called the Jews. And so then what you have today with Jewish people or the Jews or whatever the term is, they're the descendants of the nation of Judah. So they're those biological descendants of Abraham. But again, the modern day nation of Israel is not the biblical nation of Israel, because Israel, as God's chosen people, is the church. Because again, just as like Rahab is brought into Israel because of her faith in God, the true people of God are the ones who have true faith in Him, which means having true faith in Christ. So the church, Christians, are the new Israel now. We're the people of God. But genetically, Jewish people are the descendants of Abraham, as well as the Arabs, because they're the descendants of Ishmael. Which is, again, part of why you have the Israeli-Palestinian conflict right now, because you have Jewish people being like, oh, this land was promised to us forever by God, and then you've got Arabic people like, it was promised to us forever by God too, because that's what Islam says. It's all a mess.
And that's still going on.
Oh yeah.
That's still going for
It's going to go on until one people wipes out the other, basically. Or until Jesus comes back. But, yeah. Alright, let's get back to our book. So Joshua 13 through 22 recounts the dividing of the land among the tribes. The borders of each tribe's territory are given in detail. The Lord also told Joshua to appoint 6 cities of refuge. What were these cities for? Turn to Joshua 20 verses 1 through 9. Then the Lord said to Joshua, say to the people of Israel, appoint the cities of refuge of which I spoke to you through Moses, that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowingly may flee there. Excuse me. There they shall be for you a refuge from the avenger of blood. He shall flee to one of these cities, and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city, and explain his case to the elders of that city. Then they shall take him into the city, and give him a place, and he shall remain with them. And if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not give up the manslayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unknowingly, and did not hate him in the past. And he shall remain in that city until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who is high priest at the time. Then the manslayer may return to his own town and his own home, to the town of which he fled. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee, in the hill country of Naphtali, and Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. And beyond the Jordan, east of Jericho, they appointed Bezer in the wilderness on the tableland from the tribe of Reuben, and Ramoth in Gilead from the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan from the tribe of Manasseh. These were the cities designated for all the people of Israel, and for the stranger sojourning among them, that anyone who killed a person without intent could flee there, so that he might not die by the hand of the avenger of blood till he stood before the congregation. So what were the cities of refuge for?
They were for
No. Then the Lord said to Joshua, say to the people of Israel, appoint the cities of refuge of which I spoke to you through Moses, that the manslayer who strikes any person without intent or unknowingly may flee there. They shall be that for you a refuge from the avenger of blood. He shall flee to one of these cities, and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city, and explain his case to the elders of that city. Then they shall take him into the city, and give him a place, and he shall remain with them. And if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not give up the manslayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unknowingly, and did not hate him in the past. And he shall remain in that city until he has stood before the congregation for judgment, until the death of him who was high priest at the time, and the manslayer may return to his own town and his own home, to the town of which he fled. These were the cities designated for all the people of Israel, and for the stranger sojourning among them, that anyone who killed a person without intent could flee there, so that he might not die by the hand of the avenger of blood, till he stood before the congregation.
So they were for, so if a person kills someone that they're not supposed to, you could go to that city and tell them what they did, and they would invite them into the home, into one of the homes.
Sort of. So they were for people who commit manslaughter, which, well, there's a distinction to be made here. So murder has the connotation of like, murder is premeditated. I don't like that guy, I'm going to go stab him in the face.
Oh.
Manslaughter is unintentionally killing. So manslaughter is, you know, you,
Accidentally like doing like something.
yeah, so it's like manslaughter is, there's a coyote coming after your sheep, and so you fling a sling stone at the coyote to kill it, but your aim is off and you hit Bob instead. So you didn't mean, you killed Bob, but you didn't mean to kill Bob. You didn't have malice against him. It was an accident. You were trying to kill this coyote. You just had really bad aim. Or, you know, you're driving your chariot at night and it's dark and you can't see, and Bob is jaywalking, and so you accidentally run over him. You killed him, but it was unintentional. You didn't have the intent to murder him. That just kind of happened. That's manslaughter. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, now, according to the justice system that Israel has at the time, if someone in your family gets killed, the kind of the next of kin has the right to take revenge by killing you. So if you so if I murdered you, then Kaylee could avenge you, and then she could come and kill me to make up for it. And so the cities of refuge are, if I accidentally kill you, manslaughter, I don't intend to, but something terrible goes on. This is just really dark examples. But yeah, if I were to accidentally commit manslaughter, I accidentally kill you, and then I'm like, poop, now Kaylee's going to kill me. I can run to a city of refuge and be like, hey, I did a manslaughter, I didn't mean to. And then I can dwell in the city of refuge, and they will protect me from Kaylee. She's not, it's kind of it's a sanctuary. She's not allowed to take revenge on me as long as I'm in the refuge city until I stand trial. So then when the trial comes, if they're like, yeah, I don't think that was manslaughter, you could have not killed Keegan, then I'm like, okay, fine, capital punishment, and then I'm put to death anyway. But it's a way that, so if you commit murder, like, your life is forfeit. But if you commit manslaughter, the refuge cities were a way to potentially preserve your life, to let you stand trial before judgment is exacted, whereas with murder, it's just kind of like, yeah, you're a murderer, you gotta die now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how did the appointment of these cities show both God's justice and his mercy?
These show that, like if you did something that wasn't it wasn't good, or you didn't mean to, he would forgive you for that, and he has a place for you to go, I guess.
Sort of. Yeah, so that's the mercy. So remember, mercy is not getting what you do deserve. So if I do a manslaughter, I deserve to die because I killed somebody. But God's mercy says, well, if you can get to a city of refuge, we'll let you stand trial. So your life may potentially be saved if the jury decides that, yeah, it was completely unintentional. We'll let you go. So there's mercy there, but you still have to stand trial. So that's God's justice. Like, you're not completely off the hook. There's still steps to be made. It has to be verified that it actually was an accident. You didn't intend to kill that person. And your life still might be forfeit. You might still have to pay the penalty of it one way or another. So the justice is still done, but there's also an avenue of mercy, as opposed to just, well, I don't care if it was an accident or not. You killed the guy, so now I'm going to kill you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How do they determine that?
Same way anyone determines a trial. You have witnesses and lawyers and cross-examinations, and the city elders would be like, oh, yeah, I think he's telling the truth, or they'd be like, I think he's lying, let's kill him. So the next section then, the people in the land of Canaan. So the people who lived in Canaan worshipped false gods like Baal and Asheroth. God told the Israelites to clear out these people so they wouldn't tempt the Israelites to worship their gods. These are the main groups that the Israelites met in Canaan. So these are the kind of the The region is called Canaan, but not everyone is necessarily a Canaanite. Well, they are because they're in the area of Canaan, but there's smaller countries within Canaan. It's kind of confusing. But so you have the Canaanites, who are the descendants of Noah's son Ham. Maybe created the first written alphabet. But remember, Ham is the son that Noah cursed, that his descendants would have to serve the other kids' sons, and so Israel comes from, I think, Sheph. And so Canaan descends from Ham, and now they're destined to be subjugated by Israel, because it turns out that Noah was being prophetic in his curse. There's also the Amorites, who descended from Ham, the Jebusites, who they were the original, they're the ones who built Jerusalem in the first place. Then David's going to take over it later. The Hittites, who maybe came from Russia. Hivites, who Joshua makes a treaty with. The Girgashites, who also descended from Ham. The Perizzites, we don't know a lot about them. And the Philistines, who originally came from Crete. They controlled the iron in the area, and they're going to be a big thorn in Israel's side throughout most of their history.
Are they still?
In a sense, no, because the Philistines get basically wiped out, I think. In another sense, yes, because Palestine is Latin for Philistine, and so when the Romans kicked the Jews out of Israel around 70 AD and destroyed the temple, they renamed that region Palestine just to kind of stick it to the Jews, because they're like, we're going to name this country after your ancient enemies, ha 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 ha. And so now the Palestinian people that are constantly at war with the Israelis today are, in a sense, kind of a continuation of the concept of the Philistines.
Oh, I get where you're coming from.
But yeah, so if you look at this map here, this is the land of Israel that God gives to the tribes, and then they divvy up the land according to each tribe. So God tells them what the border should be, so each tribe gets their own chunk of land where they live. And so you can see Judah has this really large chunk to the south, so later on when the kingdom splits, that's going to be the southern kingdom, and then the northern kingdom is going to be all of these tribes up to the north. But God, one of the major things in the Old Testament is that God is the owner of the land, but he gives it to the Israelites so that they can steward over it. But there's this whole sense that, like, even the land given to the Israelites, it still belongs to God. They're just kind of allowed to use it, and God has ordained how it should be divvied up. And so the way it works is that each tribe gets its chunk of land, and then the people within the tribe, the land gets divvied up among them. They all have their plot of land. But like each family, because God has ordained that land goes to that family, the land kind of stays in the family in a sense forever. And so like they can sell their land, but it's really just kind of a long-term lease, because God ordained the land goes to that family, it stays in that family. So even if someone sells their land to someone, they're really just renting it out to them, because every 50 years there's supposed to be a jubilee, and then all land reverts back to the original owners in recognition that God gave them this land. They don't own it themselves. It's not theirs to buy or sell. It's given to them by God, and they can rent it out, but it reverts back to them every 50 years under the Jubilee. Well, that will become important when we get to the Book of Ruth. Is that sort of making sense? So that's the map showing how Israel gets divvied up amongst the 12 tribes. And now, because this book is laid out horribly, it's going to suddenly take us back to Joshua 10, even though we're in chapter 20. But question, did the sun really stand still in the sky? Answer, yes. Joshua 10, 1 through 15, tells us that after they captured Jericho, 5 kings came against Israel, but Joshua surprised them, and they ran off in fear. God sent down hailstones that killed many soldiers, but night was coming, and Joshua was afraid the armies would get away, so he asked God to stop the sun in the sky so he could finish the battle. Good God, who made the sun, moon, and stars, stop the earth spinning for a time? Yes, our God can. So yeah, after they take Jericho, there's a big fight. Israel's winning. The army starts to flee, and the sun is setting. And Joshua's like, if it gets dark, they're going to escape. God, please help us, and God basically, you make it stay day for a full 24 hours, the sun doesn't set, so that Israel can hunt them down and stop them in their delivered to a victory. Which we should have talked about earlier, when we were talking about Jericho, but yeah, they did not lay out this chapter very well. But yeah, so again, Book of Joshua, first half is the conquest of the land. Second half is divvying up the land amongst the tribes. And then Joshua reaffirms the covenant with Israel, and he's like, hey guys, make sure you don't screw this up, follow God's commands. And then he dies, and then Israel promptly screws it up and stops following God's commands, and that's the Book of Judges when we get back in the new year. So let's look at 48 though, and we'll wrap up this lesson. Promises kept. So God kept the promises he had made to the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He brought them into the promised land. He gave them victory over their enemies, and God gave them every reason to put all of their trust and hope in him. God also gives us every reason to commit our lives to his care, because God's promise to Joshua is also for you. And this is what God says to Joshua when he assumes leadership over Israel. He says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Which I believe was Caleb's confirmation verse. But let this word of God strengthen you this week. Write it on a slip of paper and carry it with you. Make a copy and give it to a friend. Remember, God is with you, and he loves and cares for you. Timeless Truth Connection in the blue box. God invites me, his redeemed child, to daily receive his gifts and commend my life to his care. God promised to be with Joshua as he led the Israelites into the promised land. God kept his promises to give his chosen people land and victory over their enemies. God has chosen us to be his people, because again, we in the church are the new Israel now, and he gives us the gift of salvation in Jesus our Savior. Through Jesus, he gives us the victory over sin, death, and the devil, which leads us to the Christ Connection green box. After Joshua led Israel across the Jordan and before Jericho, he saw a man standing before him. When asked who he was, the man replied, the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. He told Joshua he was on holy ground, and he allowed Joshua to worship him. Therefore, this was the Son of God in his pre-incarnate state, which means before he comes to earth to be born as a human in Jesus. So God himself came down ready to fight for his people, to win their battles. And Jesus promises to be with us as well. He has won the final battle for us against sin, death, and the devil, and he will lead us into the new promised land when he comes again. Any questions on the book of Joshua? All right.
Sounds pretty good to me.
So now they're in the promised land, and like I said, we'll be off for 2 weeks. And when we come back on January 8th, we will go through the book of Judges and learn how Israel screws everything up.
Yay, more screws up.
So, yeah, the book of Judges is kind of a microcosm of the whole Old Testament. So it's just this constant cycle of Israel screws up, God punishes them, God saves them, they come back to God, then they screw it up, and God punishes them. And it's kind of the same story over and over again, because they never learn. And we never learn, it's really good.
Yep.
But yeah, have fun in Africa. Don't forget to study your books. Eli, Bella, and Emily, we're off until the 8th. Hopefully you'll be in church between now and then, and then I'll see you on the 8th. Work on your books as well. I would like to get those memorized soon. That's all. Bye.
Thank you, Pastor.